Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you are watching this. Welcome back to the first episode of 2022 from the Since I Was Young podcast for all things Hearts, all Midlothian news, chats, and reviews. Joining you again, unfortunately, for this year is myself, Ewan Ramsey, and Alan Scrimger. Alan, how are you doing, sir? I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year, sir. You doing all right?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good, thanks. It was as close to normal a Christmas as we've had for a long time, so it was very nice. And what about yourself? Were you good?
You and me both, mate. It was a very sort of a quieter one, but at the same time, it was like sort of a quite nice, spending time with the family, for this sort of a Christmas as well compared to last year as well. So it was a very nice day. Thank you very much for asking, my man. And on that note, like as well to all of the listeners as well, we do hope you had a lovely Christmas and a very happy New Year and all the best for 2022. And on this note as well, this is the 35th episode of the Since I Was Young podcast, and we have been working quietly behind the scenes, more specifically, the lovely man to my left, Alan, throughout this week. Got a brilliant interview to bring you all the way from down under as well. So as I said beforehand, Alan was busy behind the scenes and he managing to get an interview which was named Aussiescout, and the reason and the purpose for this interview was to get a bit of background info on the first signing of the January transfer window for Hearts, which was Nathaniel Atkinson. Of course, he's not actually with Hearts at this moment in time due to COVID restrictions, Alan, or the visa sort of stuff just getting slightly held up. So, but he will be with the squad in due course. But we thought it would be a good idea to just get a bit of a background on what kind of player he is like, etc. So Alan took the time out to come off of a night shift and then to try and work out the time difference all the way in Australia. It was a bit of a difficult sort of one to actually plan, but he got it done nonetheless. So thank you very much, Alan, and we look forward to hearing the interview itself. And just to give you a brief rundown of what we plan for this month in particular. So, of course, the winter break was brought forward, of course, due to the ever growing cases of COVID. But as you're probably all well aware, our first game will be against St Johnstone on the 18th. Is that right, Alan? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
See, as you can tell, I've been brushing up on my skills as to do as much research as possible, but of course, no change there. So yeah, the first game will be scheduled for the 18th, which is against St Johnstone, and then the week after on the 22nd, I believe, Alan. Yep, I'm still doing all right. Is against Alkin Albert in the Scottish Cup as well, followed by the Celtic game as well on the 26th of January. So we'll have a lot to pack in. We're not too particularly sure how we're going to do it in the order of terms of doing one for each game or doing one as a whole. But of course, we will let you know in due course as we plan to do that. So yeah, I think there's not really a lot to go through as such. But as always, guys, if you're planning to find yourself a new podcast for 2022, look no further. Since I Was Young podcast for all things Heart of Midlothian. If you are a fan, please think about subscribing, smash that like button. This is always appreciated as well. And if you want to get in contact with us through our socials as well, you always can. We are at Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all at SIWY Pod as well. Alternatively, as well, if you want to get in contact with us through our email as well, since I was young, 1874 at gmail.com. And as always, if you want to get in contact with either myself or Alan, our links to our Twitter as well will be in the description. So, Alan, as I said at the start, mate, you only just got the interview done just a few days ago, and I will say beforehand, before our viewers hear the interview, I will say it was absolutely fantastic, mate. So very well done. And yeah, what can we expect, and what do we expect to hear from the interview that you did with Aussiescout?
Yeah, it was, as you said, just not too long ago there, it was a bit of a logistical nightmare.
Yeah,
Him
I can tell.
him being based in Sydney and obviously me being here. So it took a little bit of time to get it going, but thankfully managed to get it done. We just basically covered a bit of the background on Nathaniel Atkinson because I'm sure not just myself, but many Hearts supporters will have never heard of him before. So it was as much for my benefit as it was for
Of course.
the viewers and listeners. It was basically just his early career, kind of where he's come from, and basically a breakdown on the player that we're getting. And spoilers, it sounds very promising, but yeah, I'll let everybody be the judge of it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note as well, we're pass you through to the interview with Alan and Aussiescout, all about Nathaniel Atkinson, the new signing for Heart of Midlothian. We do hope you enjoy, and we will see you again next week. Enjoy.
I'm delighted to be joined by a guest today who has far more knowledge of the Australian A-League than I do. Obviously, being in the Scottish football bubble, you don't tend to pay too much attention to football further afield. When a name comes up for a new recruit, it's always interesting to kind of have a little dig into his history and the sort of player that he is, so that we know what we're getting ourselves in for. So thank you very much for joining me this morning, my time, evening, your time, Aussiescout. I'm going to give you the floor in terms of the player, and then I'll fire some questions at you and we'll take it from there. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. And thank you very much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem at all. We had a brief conversation about the previous new arrival, Cammy Devlin, over Twitter DMs. So it's nice to get you on for a chat.
No worries. So I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown on Nathaniel Atkinson. First, what's unique about Nathaniel Atkinson? He's from Launceston in Tasmania. And for those Scottish viewers who I assume don't know Tasmania, it's a small island off the mainland of Australia. It has a population of around 550,000, and it's very rare to have a professional footballer from Tasmania. There are only, to my knowledge, 3 current professional footballers from Tasmania. And there's never been a professional football side there. And as a result of that, Nathaniel Atkinson had to relocate at only 14 to the main city in Tasmania, which is Hobart, to pursue football. And then he was signed by Melbourne City age 16. And the story of how he was signed is actually quite interesting. The Tasmanian State under 16 or youth team played a friendly against Melbourne City, and Atkinson scored after 15 seconds and then ultimately scored a hat-trick, and they signed him immediately after. So yeah, I mean, that's his background. In terms of the player that Hearts fans are going to get to see, obviously he's a right fullback, but he's been very, very versatile in his career so far. He's played left back, he's played right wing, and as the story of how he was signed would probably tell you, he started off as a more attacking player, which is reflected in the way he plays right fullback. So over his career, he's played since 2017-18. That was his first season as an 18-year-old. And that season, he started 16 games after making his debut. So he started and cemented his place in the first team. Since then, he's really shown his quality. He's an attacking fullback. He's very athletic. He's quick. He's strong. He's powerful. Defensively, he's aggressive, but going forward, he's really dangerous. He's excellent 1v1. He loves taking on players. He's always looking to take players on. He's unpredictable. He goes on long runs. And defensively, he's strong. He's strong in the tackle. He's pretty good in the air. He can be prone to lapses of concentration, but he's always in a league, in the A-League, where the general level of athleticism isn't so high, I would say. And he's a standout player in terms of his athleticism. He's able to compensate for maybe lapses of concentration with his athleticism. And yeah, he's been dangerous going forward. He's scored goals. He's got assists. He's constantly making runs in behind, whether that be overlapping or underlapping. And yeah, that's sort of his profile.
sounds pretty promising then. I'm trying not to get too far ahead of myself with this, because I have a general kind of rule of thumb that if it's a player that's arriving that I don't know anything about, I don't like to. I mean, obviously there's hype around certain players when they come to a new club, but I try to not get swept up in that, because I think it puts them on a bit of a kind of pedestal before they've had a chance to actually prove themselves at the club they're joining. So from what you're saying, he sounds like the ideal sort of profile for the players that we're looking to bring in as well. Obviously early 20s with room to develop and grow by the sounds of things. My concern that I have, and I mean, feel free to put my mind at ease on this one. The Scottish League is quite a physical league. You don't get a lot of time on the ball. You tend to get closed down quite a lot, and it is quite aggressive. But then obviously, again, as I say, being kind of alien to the A-League as I am, it may be that suits him with the Scottish style. Maybe it's not too dissimilar from that.
Well, what I say is he's very physical. And there'll probably be less time on the ball in Scotland, but he's got very good acceleration. His movement off the mark is excellent, and that's how he's able to beat players so often. I mean, his first touch is a little bit inconsistent. It can be good, it can be bad, but the fact he's so quick and also he's strong, he's able to push past players physically. It allows him to compensate for maybe what he lacks in technical ability. But in terms of I get what you say about adapting to a different league, and there's always a certain element of you don't know what you're going to get. It's unpredictable. But one thing that's worth noting for your viewers is that he went to the Olympics in July, I think, and he was Australia's standout player. Australia played Spain, they played Argentina, and in both those games, he was clearly Australia's standout player. Against Spain, he played against Pedri, he played against Mikel Oyarzabal, he played against Dani Olmo, Marco Asensio. These are top-class players, and he really held his own. And ultimately, Australia got knocked out in the knockout stages. They beat Argentina. They lost 1-0 to Spain with a late winner for Spain. But he got a yellow card in the 96th minute of the game against Spain, which ruled him out of Australia's final group game. And that was a big loss because he was Australia's best player there. So in terms of the quality, I think he's capable of it. As you said, it's unpredictable, but I think he can step up.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly good to know. I did a little bit of research prior to jumping on this with you, and obviously over the last couple of weeks since we've announced the signing, we're still awaiting his arrival. I think it's just due to visa delays and obviously the whole kind of COVID travel restrictions and things like that at the moment. So hopefully he'll be with us in the not too distant future. In terms of that, obviously I know he played at the Olympics, and that's absolutely fantastic. I think Cammy Devlin was in the squad. I'm not sure how much game time he got at the Olympics, but it's certainly, as I say, I'll keep going back to it because I'm alien to the Australian A-League, to be fair. But it seems to be that, certainly in the case of Cammy Devlin anyway, he's come over and really captured the imagination of Hearts supporters, kind of come out of nowhere, to be honest. And obviously Nathaniel Atkinson, as I've said, does have a bit of hype around him. And from what you're saying, it's justified because he seems to be the real deal from what you're saying, and also from what I've read and heard and watched on YouTube. I tend to steer clear of YouTube compilations sometimes because they can make even the most average players seem like they're absolutely fantastic. But the issue of adapting is a gamble that you're willing to make, I suppose. In terms of the deal, now this is something that I wanted to just kind of get your views on. We were obviously linked with him, and I happened to just be scrolling through Twitter and saw his name pop up, and someone linked him with Hearts, and then that's when I reached out to yourself for a bit more information on the player. And then the week after, it seemed like the deal was done. And it's not so much an issue, because it's certainly not, because obviously we've managed to tie up the deal, but was there other clubs interested in him, or has he had the opportunity? I know he's still quite early in his professional career. Has he had the opportunity to move to another club, be it in Australia, or make that leap into European football prior to obviously signing for Hearts?
It's a good question, and I can say for a fact, as a fact, that there were definitely other clubs interested, other European clubs, and I know there was interest in Belgium. I know there was interest from other clubs, and there was strong interest as well. I think Hearts. I think your manager Robbie Nielsen described it as a bit of a coup to get him, and like I think there's an element of truth in that. There were other clubs interested, and I think other clubs, yeah, and so
Yeah,
there was definitely other interest. Hearts were not the only club in terms of interest from Australia. In Australia, it's interesting you asked that because he actually signed for another Australian club at the start of last season. He signed for Perth Glory, but it's very complex because Perth is in Western Australia and they have very strict COVID regulations with border restrictions and so forth. And because of that, he actually wasn't able to sign. He stayed at Melbourne City, which proved a blessing for him in the end. So, yeah, he has had chances to move to other clubs. He did, in fact, sign a contract with another club, being Perth Glory. And now he has had interest from other clubs in Europe. So, yeah, that's all I can say. I know that by the time that the news came out, I think the deal was already basically finalized. So hence the quick nature of the announcement, the news, and then the announcement.
Yeah, it certainly seemed to be quite quick, I think, and I think, like you say, Robbie Nielsen did describe it as a coup that we've managed to get him here, and it does sound as if he is a player that will fit into our profile, because going back to what you said about the player, obviously he's predominantly right-sided, plays right wing back, right midfield, right wing sort of areas. Our current right winger is a player, Northern Irish player, who's been around the club for a good few years now, 32 years of age, Michael Smith, coming towards the sort of end of his career with us, unfortunately, because he's been a fantastic servant. But he was it's quite interesting the way our system's set up, and I won't go into lots of detail, but we play obviously two wing backs. The left-sided wing back is much more the sort of hug the touchline and bomb up and down kind of player, whereas Michael Smith on the right tends to cut inside a little bit and tends to kind of get involved more in the middle and kind of underlap, as you say. And obviously, from what you say, Nathaniel Atkinson fits that mold. In terms of the fact that he can cover left back, that's something that interests me. Is it a case of he's 2-footed, or is it more just a case of he can cover it and do a decent job there?
It's interesting. I wouldn't say he's 2-footed. He's definitely capable on his left, but he's much more dominant on his right. He covered left back actually in a big game in the 2020 A-League Grand Final. Melbourne City's captain was unavailable because he just had a child, and he played left back, and it went to extra time, and Melbourne City actually lost in the end. But Atkinson was brilliant. He was really outstanding in that game. He was involved in everything. In terms of playing left back, when he played, Melbourne City's system has inverted fullbacks. So he wasn't hugging the touchline. He wasn't necessarily crossing much of his left foot. He was, although he was using his left foot more than he probably would on the right, he was inverted, so he was cutting inside onto his right foot. But he is very versatile. He started further up the pitch, and he's shown consistently. I mean, he played, something you may have read is he was man of the match in the A-League Grand Final last season. And he was playing right wing, and he played right wing in the entire sort of final series. So he's very versatile. He started off in midfield. He can play an attack. He can play on both flanks. So I think that's a real strong point of his.
Yeah, certainly sounds it. Just sort of one of the kind of final points that I have, and I just wanted to kind of pick your brains on it. There was discipline rather, is something that's very important in Scottish football. Obviously, to keep the head in the physical league and the nature of it is quite easy to get wound up. Cammy Devlin, again, I keep going back to him. He seems to have really taken to that side of the Scottish game, and to the point where we've now got ourselves a player that opposition fans do not like, because Cammy Devlin is known to put a little foot in here and there, and maybe just sort of on the boundaries of what's acceptable, and seems to get away with 90% of them, hence why away supporters don't tend to like him very much. What is Nathaniel Atkinson's sort of disciplinary record like in that sense?
off the top of my head, his on-field discipline is pretty good. He gives it. The one thing I'd say is something that I've noticed watching him play is that often he might get beaten in a one-on-one duel, which doesn't happen that often, honestly, because he's so athletic, he's so strong, he's so quick. And sometimes if he does get beaten, he might give away a cheap rash foul and get himself on a yellow card. But from memory, I don't think he's been sent off. Same with Cammy Devlin in the A-League. So on the field, his discipline's pretty good. He is an aggressive player. He embraces the physical side of the game. Just by nature of his frame, he's strong. He's able to sort of use his body to push players off the ball. In terms of discipline on field, as I said, it's pretty good. There is, and I think I did mention this to you, there is a few questions about his discipline off field. I mean, something which I don't know if you've read or heard, he was actually he impressed at the Olympics, but he was actually lucky to go to the Olympics at all because he was one of 3 players who was suspended for the Olympics because of a incident with the details still remain relatively unknown to the public, but an incident that happened while at a qualifying tournament in Cambodia relating to breaking curfew and Tinder, etc., etc. So he was suspended for a long period of time, and COVID really saved him with the postponement of the Olympics. Like he wouldn't have gone to the Olympics otherwise. And there were also a few murmurs about his discipline this season. I mean, he lost. He wasn't playing. He didn't start the first few games for Melbourne City this season. And there's questions about his discipline in preseason in that regard. But on field, his discipline is pretty good.
That sounds good. I did read a little bit about the off-field disciplinary situation, but as you say, the details seem to be rather vague. But then I can understand why they obviously want to keep these things kind of as under wraps as they can. But no, it certainly seems, certainly from the breakdown that you've given us there, that we've really managed to get somewhat of a player on our hands. Again, we seem to be targeting this kind of profile of player, having been to the Australian market and brought Cammy Devlin in for a very small fee compared to probably what he's worth now, and only half a season since he's been at the club. Nathaniel Atkinson strikes me as a similar kind of player that we've obviously done a good deal for. I did read that he was due to be out of contract in the summer of this year. So we've obviously, I'm not sure in terms of what the rules are contractually in Australia, but certainly in Scotland, if a player over the age of 24 reaches the last 6 months of their contract, they're then free to speak to other clubs about a move in the summer on a free transfer. So I don't know if that translates to the Australian situation, but it seems to me from what you're saying that we've kind of jumped the gun and jumped in ahead of competition for his signature, and maybe offered Melbourne City a reasonable fee to get the deal done now. Obviously, Scottish football currently on a winter break at the moment, partially due to the Omicron variant rearing its head in Scotland and kind of causing havoc with that. But equally, obviously, there is a winter break in Scottish football in general, but it was just brought forward because we're currently unable to have fans in stadiums just now. So the clubs basically came together and said, well, we'd rather just not play, just bring the winter break forward. So I think that's potentially helped us get the Nathaniel Atkinson deal done kind of sooner rather than later.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know, I think the rules are pretty similar in terms of talking to other clubs, but one thing that is unique about Australia is that short-term contracts are very common. 1 year, 2 year contracts are very common. So players are relatively cheap as it is. Players' contracts always seem to be expiring. And I think, as you say, by getting him 6 months out from the expiration of his contract, I think it's a good deal for Hearts. I don't think the transfer fee is that large. Transfer fees coming from Australia never tend to be that large. And having seen him perform on the world stage, I think, you're getting a bargain, really.
Well, that's great to hear. It seems to be, as I say, the sort of market and recruitment that we're going down at the moment is players of that profile that probably then have resale value, because it's essentially a gateway to European football for players to come over from Australia. Certainly, Cammy Devlin's spoken a lot about wanting to play at the biggest stage and on the biggest levels, and potentially getting a move down to the English Premier League or to that effect. and that may well be the same case with Nathaniel Atkinson from what you're suggesting.
Yeah, definitely. I was a big fan of Cameron Devlin, and I think Atkinson has as much, if not more, room for growth. Maybe more, just because of his physical ability, which maybe Cameron Devlin doesn't have in the same way. But yeah, I think Hearts seem to be, as you say, they seem to be targeting a certain demographic of players, and doing very well by the looks of it. I'm not a close follower of the Scottish Premiership, but I check their results just because of Cammy Devlin and Ange Postecoglou also at Celtic. But yeah, Hearts seem to be doing very well and making smart signings.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly, I won't bore you with details because we've had long years of average players being brought in, and we've recently changed the backroom structure, shall we say, in terms of recruitment, and it seems to be paying off, and hopefully Nathaniel Atkinson can join that long list of successful Australian players that pull on the maroon and walk out at Tynecastle in front of the fans. And hopefully, as I say, he can have a Cammy Devlin effect, and I'm sure the fans will love him as soon as they see him based off of what you're giving us. As I said at the start of this, I try not to buy into the hype of players because I'd rather make my own judgment when they do make that, walk out into Tynecastle and play in front of the fans, and we see them for what they are. But it's certainly, again, as I say, from the things that I've read, watched, and obviously this chat with yourself, it's making it very hard not to buy into the hype. I'm being honest with you. But
yeah,
no,
definitely. I hope he smashes it. Honestly, I hope he really does as well, and I have confidence that he will.
That's great. As I say, I'm more than happy for players like that to come in and showcase themselves at Hearts and then get that move, because it makes us money, and then we can go back in and maybe pluck another couple of Australians out of the market somewhere.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
That's great. Well, I think we've covered all the bases that I wanted to cover with you there, mate. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whatever time it currently is for yourself over in Sydney. But that's great. As I say, thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. And I'm away to go and watch Nathaniel Atkinson clips on YouTube on repeat, I think, at this point.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.